it's as shocking as the death of any of the journalists have been. I suppose it's made all the more terrible because Wael Darouk has endured such extraordinary personal tragedy as well as injury himself. He's sort of terrible, terrible treatment that Gaza's journalists have suffered. My sympathies go to his family, his friends, his loved ones, as well, of course, to his colleagues who I've spoken with earlier today and were clearly feeling shattered by events today.
Now, we have a situation, and perhaps you can make it clearer, Tim, as to the situation that journalists are in at the moment. Internationally, there hasn't been any journalists allowed in, apart from, I think, a CNN correspondent briefly with the Jordanians to their field camp for a few hours. So reliant on information from the sole numbers that are there, do you have any idea of how many journalists are currently able to work in Gaza and the conditions that they're living in?
Well, at the outset of this conflict, there were around 1,000 journalists working in Gaza. As you rightly say, international correspondents have not been allowed in. I know that quite a lot have camped on the border in Rafah for days, petitioning to get in, but none that I'm aware of have. One or two have gone in with the Israeli army as kind of embedded reporters in very, very controlled circumstances. So Gaza's journalist corps starts out at the beginning of this conflict about 1,000 strong, and between sort of 8 and 10% of their number are now dead, quite a large number also injured. And they are continuing to work in really circumstances that it's quite hard, I think, to imagine. There's very little food. There's very little water in Gaza. That obviously affects all of the population. There's almost no fuel. So when we see television pictures coming from Gaza, the cameras have been carried on the shoulders of the journalists who have gone to where they believe the stories are. So they are at the edges of physical collapse, starvation, and dehydration. And yet, astonishingly, they continue to work. I know when I've spoken with them, they've talked about their determination to find every story in Gaza and to make sure that the world can share that. I can only think they're almost inspired by the hardships they've suffered, but truly they are very considerable.
I've worked and covered many war zones in the past, the Arab Spring in Egypt, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq. I can't remember a situation where so many international journalists weren't allowed in. I just wonder your take on perhaps comparisons with previous conflicts and also that sense of what the loss is, reliant on those people, few surviving, trying to report, versus the international teams that simply aren't allowed to get in, and the lack of a full picture being told.
I agree. I can't think of another war, another conflict, really, that has played out in this way. There have been some that journalists internationally haven't paid much attention to, but mostly that there has been open facilitation of journalists going in and reporting a situation. This sort of sealed community that Gaza has been since the 7th of October, and to an extent before then, is quite remarkable. And I think one of the motivations possibly for keeping international journalists out is that I think it was widely believed amongst Gaza's journalists that they were less likely to be killed if they had somebody from the New York Times or France 24, working a few yards from them. It's the widely held belief of journalists in Gaza that they are being deliberately targeted. Many have told me that. Some have even described receiving phone calls from people purporting to be the Israeli Defense Force, telling them that they are going to be targeted and telling them that their homes and their families can expect a bomb in the next few days. And all too often, those have turned out to be accurate. It's a unique set of circumstances that has been created here, and one that makes it very difficult, I think, for the international community to gain kind of impression, the kind of...
Tim, thank you. I think we're losing you just at the sound at the end, but really appreciate your time and your update this morning. This afternoon. Good to talk to you.